Love lives here.
Oh my gosh, I'm just filled to the brim with all that's gone before. Thank you so much, Jubel. And thank you, Michelle, for grounding us in that incredible affirmation that we're speaking. I know that Riverside is about transformation, it's about love. And I could really feel that going out into the entire world this morning. And I want to greet all of you with a big good morning, Riverside, and all those love streamers who have joined us today, wherever you are. You know, and one of the things that I love about being able to broadcast this way is that we get to travel all over, you know, and I love seeing where you're coming from, and so put it in the chat so we can see and just build that energy, that power of love. And it's great to see Patty coming across the screen. Welcome, Patty. So good to see you here today. And Corey, great to see you too. Thank you for being here. You know, the theme this month is conscious connections. And, you know, when I was thinking about this, Keanu Reeves kept on popping up and saying, cosmic, dude. So that early Keanu Reeves and all those Bill and Ted adventure movies, he was there, you know, and that's part of this, you know, that lovely humor that and joy that we bring to life is always a part of this as well. And really, you know, the conscious connection is the reality of our life. You know, nothing could exist without those cosmic connections, from the quantum level, you know, all those attractions that make up our manifest world, to all of the connections that we can't measure, you know, those feeling connections that we can't measure, we can't see, none of that. That also has a tremendous lasting effect on us. And the title of this week's talk is Bridge Over Troubled Water. And I know that a lot of us have been feeling those troubled waters. You know, we've been through a lot this year. 2020 has been our challenge, right, to rise up and build bridges. You know, and we've had a lot of opportunities to work those muscles and join together to create those bridges. Last week, our wonderful ministerial intern, Neil Hayner, told a humorous story about how we help one another find the way. And in this story, it was about monks who were kind of playing a trick on a guy in a way. And there were stepping stones, but, you know, this guy thought that it was a challenge of walking on water. Well, you know we're not at that point yet. Maybe some of us are, we can walk on water, but I know I'm not there yet, you know, and those stepping stones, you know, were placed so to help people get across the stream. But what happens when we are experiencing raging waters? You know, I think we've felt that this year. We're right in the middle of these raging waters, and it looks like it's impossible to get from one point to the next. So what do? Those raging waters can be in our relationships, you know, the people we live with, our families, those love partners. It can be on a national or global scale. And, you know, all of that's been visible this year in a very powerful way, maybe in a way that we haven't experienced it before. And we can build those bridges to move from one point to the next. And, you know, one of the things that I'm always reminded of when I come into community is that those connections, that power is here with us right now to build those connections. And with those bridges, you know, as we're making those connections, just think about it. You know, they don't come immediately. It doesn't rise up immediately. A bridge is a process. It builds. But once those connections are made, we rise above the turmoil and danger of those raging waters. And I was reminded as I was doing this talk, and when we are in voting season, that we lost a great American hero with the passing of John Lewis. And and I say loss because he's not here in physical presence, but of course he left this incredible legacy and a bridge for us to build something even larger, something that will carry us across any kind of trouble or turmoil that we might have. Now, he was propelled onto the national stage in 1965 when he led a march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, to call attention to the hundreds of thousands of African Americans of Alabama that were denied the right to vote. And, I was a young teen when this was going on. And, I felt all that trouble. I felt, the kind of unsettled and terrible feelings that were a part of that era. And it was a time of great troubles. We've had great troubles in this nation, and this was definitely an example of a time of great trouble. And yet he had the love and courage to step into leadership at that moment, to lead this march. He was only 25 years old. Can you imagine that? He was only 25 years old at the time, and he stepped up to do this. And you may have seen the footage of the march. You may have seen it in the movies, recent films. And the marchers were met by troopers who were armed with billy clubs, and they knocked Lewis to the ground, and they struck him on his head. And when he tried to get up, they struck him again, and his skull was fractured. He was, in that moment, he was sure that he was going, he was at the point of death. So he almost died on that bridge that day. And the images of this march that came to be known as Bloody Sunday were broadcast across the nation and helped to lead to the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which prohibits racial discrimination in voting. And those images, it was, they sparked something in people. And I believe what was going on, why it had the impact that it did, that people didn't just say, oh yeah, that's exactly what people deserve for doing this. It was because of the marchers being grounded in love. They had love as they began that march. And it wasn't only love for themselves. It was love that was generated for everyone involved. It was this tremendous love that they had vowed to let lead the way. They were committed to love, no matter what met them along the way as they were doing this march. So this was a moment where we saw powerfully love in action. And what it was met with, it was violence and hatred, but really, those images melted and dissolved all of that hatred and paved the way for a great leap forward in our relationships with one another. And the love and the bodies of the people were the bridge that helped all of us recognize our connection, our deep connection as human beings. And people, jumped up and they were ready to help change this unequal situation that we were entangled in. It was something that was just, brought to the fore. We could see it. What does this look like? It's an ugliness that so many people did not want as the way that we live our lives. Now, this was empathy that was aroused, incredible empathy, and there was a critical mass of people that were a part of this empathy. And forgiveness formed the girders of this bridge that was built, these connections that were built between people. Forgiveness strengthened everything that day. And in reality, forgiveness preceded the marchers. The marchers had already done the work of forgiving what was going on, forgiving and still knowing that this was something that they needed to engage in to build this bridge and make it a reality. In 1927, the Declaration of Principles was first published in the Science of Mind magazine. Ernest Holmes, the founder of religious science, wrote, "We believe the ultimate goal of life to be a complete freedom from all discord of every nature, and that this goal is sure to be attained by all." Now, this is the high ideal that we are aiming for in our spiritual work. The opposite of discord is harmony and balance. So this morning, listening to the invocation, that just resonated so much with me when our beautiful practitioner Anita said harmony and balance. That is what we're aiming for all the time. And I know that we hold this truth, this high ideal of harmony and balance. And, at the same time, like all great teachings, we're sometimes unsure of the process involved to reach our goal. The teacher is pointing the way, and it's like, yeah, I can see it over there. Oh, but what's the next step? How do I achieve that? Or how do we achieve that as a collectivity? And what I know is that forgiveness itself is healing. And just like the people who engaged in that march, they let love and forgiveness lead the way. So it proceeded. The master teacher, Jesus, gave the disciples the Lord's Prayer when they asked to be taught to pray. And one of the line in there that resonates with today's message is, "Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors." Or, in another translation, it is, "Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us." And that's the guide, really, for how we live our lives. That's how we make it to that next point, is through forgiveness. When we are holding on to a real or imagined injury, we're not fully present with spirit. And just imagine, we all have those kinds of perceived, imagined, or real injuries that we experience over a course of our life. They can come in all kinds of forms. And when we're not fully present with spirit, what happens? We behave differently, right? We're off. People can see it. Your body carries it. Your face broadcasts it sometimes. You know, there's all kinds of things that happen on an outward level and on an internal level. We might lose sleep. We might be agitated. We might have thought, ugly thoughts of revenge or, retribution, punishment, judgment, condemnation, and that's all just, that's the troubled waters that are stirred up that we have to build a bridge to cross over. But what if we forgive? What if we decide, okay, the first step in this is to forgive, to forgive, to let go, to release. We know that when that happens, healing, we understand, we're aware of the healing process. It begins right there. We find we can love again, we can trust again, we can have faith again. We return to balance and harmony with all those around us and with life itself. We become giving, forgiving. We're able to give, but when it's all blocked up, we can't, right? It's not possible to give when we're in that place of holding on to a grudge or a perceived hurt or a real hurt. We can't give. It's blocked. And once we can forgive, that activates the law of reciprocity right there. As we give, we can also receive. It's open. The channels are open then. And we receive the gifts. And, we can never outgive God. We can't. So when we release, we allow that to open. A few on educational TV or in the public channels, there's a documentary on called Helping Hands. And it's about the lives of the atomic bomb orphans. And it's a really moving documentary. After the bombing, many of the children who were orphaned were left to wander the streets, and one thing that, it's heartbreaking to imagine this happening, children wandering through all of this rubble and destruction, and they've been traumatized. They've lost their families. They are hurting and, numb and lost. And some of them died of hunger and starvation because there wasn't anything to eat. There was no water. But others survived. And many of them survived because of helping hands. And just imagine that, building that bridge by reaching out a hand, right? And for me, one of the most moving stories was of an orphan child who was one of those children who was aimlessly roaming the streets. By chance, he found a Korean man who had been a boarder in his home, and he was also a survivor. And he saw him, and they just ran to one another and embraced. The Korean man reached out his hand to him, and they embraced one another. And the Korean man praised this child for surviving. And, they were just, it was just this incredible reunion. And he took him to Korea with him so he could have a home. And this was an incredibly difficult time because Japan had occupied Korea from 1910 to 1945. And there was a lot of resentment and hatred and of Japan and a lot of the atrocities that happened to the Korean people. So all of this was there. And this man loved this boy so much that he took him with him. Unfortunately, he gave him shelter and care, but his family in Korea wasn't able to open their hearts to this young boy. So the young boy left the shelter and went on the streets again. And he was on the streets wandering until this little girl found him. And this little girl brought him home with her. And her mother was a widow with 4 children, and she was struggling to survive. They lived in really dire circumstances, but they had a roof over their house, over their heads, and she was taking care of her children. And, when this man is telling this story, you could just feel that love, that mother love present in that home. And she immediately gave him shelter. When she found out he didn't have a home, she said, "Why don't you come and live with us?" And she treated him, she raised him, and she treated him as if he were her own child. Now, what makes this really remarkable and a real story of forgiveness is that as an adult, he found out that her husband had been murdered by a Japanese man. So even, that didn't even come into the picture at all in this relationship with this child. This mother's heart was so filled with loving kindness that she accepted the child. And when people would make horrible comments about this child being Japanese, and how can she do this? How can she take this Japanese child into her home? How can she possibly do that? She defended him and said, "This child is innocent. He is not the one who committed those acts. He is innocent." So she had already forgiven, and she could see who this child was, and her heart was opened. And there was nothing that could get in the way of it, because forgiveness led the way. And forgiveness was the bridge between that separate self that she could have just crawled into, right? And not seen that she had a connection, a human connection, a heart connection with this Japanese child. So it formed that bridge, no separation, to the awakened soul of this beautiful woman. Now we all have that. We have it. That's who we are. We are these beautiful souls. And sometimes we don't know how to get there, but forgiveness is a way. And this connection that was forged when she took this child in was unbreakable. And when they interviewed this man, he was an elderly man. And you could see that love that woman poured into him in the life that he was leading right then. Now, Ernest Holmes says, forgiveness means reconciliation in spite of estrangement. It means reunion despite hostility. It means acceptance of those who have been unacceptable. It means reception of those who are rejected. Forgiveness is unconditional, or it is not forgiveness at all. And that's from Help for Today on page 98. Oh, man, that's a powerful statement, isn't it? Forgiveness is unconditional, or it is not forgiveness at all. So it's not a transaction. It's not like I'm forgiving you and I'm going to get something out of it. You're going to owe me. It's not transactional like that, as we saw with this woman and child. It's not transactional at all. It is unconditional. Now, I'm just kind of thinking of some funny things that happen in life. Sometimes I've heard someone say, "Oh yeah, I did this, and so my spouse is, she's got that in the back of, she's got that card in her hand that she can play sometime, right?" And that's not forgiveness. That's saving something up to use against somebody. That's not that's not a release of a debt or forgiveness. It's not. That's having a card to play in the future. It's transactional. And what we're moving toward when we practice forgiveness is something that is a transformation, complete transformation. We release it, we let it go. And it is that inside work that has powerful ramifications in our lives. And let's think about it. That unconditional forgiveness frees us. That doesn't mean we have to accept unacceptable behavior. No. But it is freedom. It is freedom. Pure freedom. It's that awakened soul that we saw in this woman, the Korean woman who accepted this child into her life. Now, Jack Kornfield points out that in Buddhist monasteries, when conflict arises, the monks and nuns do a formal practice of reconciliation, and there is intention that is very simple. Whatever hurt is within one, it is possible to seek reconciliation. Now, that's a next step, reconciliation. By doing the practice, the seed of reconciliation is planted. Sometimes it's not possible to talk to the other person or even a group of people, but it's still possible to hold reconciliation in our hearts. We do our part in the healing. So right now, we're going to do this. We're going to do this as our treatment. Now, I'm going to invite you to take a deep breath and get comfortable right where you are and stay with your breath until you feel just that release. And we start with those immediately around us. May all mothers and daughters be reconciled. May all life partners be reconciled. May all sons and fathers be reconciled. May all mothers and sons be reconciled. May all the family be reconciled. And we can go out further. May I be reconciled with my neighbor. May all neighbors be reconciled. May all nations be reconciled. May we all be reconciled. And take a moment to nurture that seed right in the center of your heart. And I allow this to be, and so it is.
love.